Welcome to the NICU Today Podcast, a podcast to give families a new point of support as they navigate the NICU journey. Thank you for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe wherever you enjoy your podcast and share this episode with anyone who might find it helpful. Welcome back to the NICU Today Podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Tanner Walsh. She is the proud mom of 6-year-old boy-girl twins and a primary care pediatrician based in Delaware County, Pennsylvania. Her twins, who were the first in her family and a complete surprise, were born at 35 weeks at the very hospital where she works, spending 6 days in the NICU. That experience shaped her perspective as both a doctor and a parent. Fluent in Spanish and a graduate of UAG, a medical school in Guadalajara, Mexico, she brings a culturally sensitive and family-centered approach to care. As an internationally board-certified lactation consultant, she's made it her personal mission to meet families where they are in their feeding journeys and beyond. Outside of work, there's something outside of work. No, I'm just kidding. Outside of work, she loves to read and bake cupcakes. Welcome, Dr. Walsh, to the NICU Today podcast.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Yes, it's great to have you. Well, I'm really excited to talk with you today. Want to hear all about your background, why you became a pediatrician, and of course, we want to hear about your sweet miracles.
Yeah. So I always wanted to be a pediatrician my whole life, probably since I was about 8. There's just something about kids and the wonder that they bring to the world that makes me want to be able to take care of them. And I love building connections with the families that I take care of. And having children was definitely a different experience to that. And I will say that as a pediatrician, I still say the same things, but sometimes I say them in a very different way. Like, hey, this is definitely non-negotiable. You got to do this. And I know it's hard because I've been there. And so kind of language along those lines. But having kids and the twins are my only babies has been quite an experience. And I got to experience life as a patient and as a NICU mom, which was definitely eye-opening, I will say, because I only ever got to stand on the other side as a resident and as a physician, in my training and then, after my training.
Well, I want to talk to you more about that. But first, leading up to the twins' birth, all of us have different experiences, obviously, heading into pregnancy, starting a family. Did you spend time on bed rest? Were you in the hospital? Did you carry to closer to full term? Tell us about that.
So I had I was smooth sailing. I was really fortunate. Some twin moms or multiples moms, they really experience a lot of really bad symptomatology, like in the very first trimester, a lot of nausea and things like that. I was super fortunate in that I just kind of coasted through. And at about 28 weeks, I started to suffer from really severe pain. And the babies were still small enough that if I ate, they would kind of move. And it was just related to their positioning, like inside of my body. So it wasn't any other kind of pain. There was no like contraption I could wear to make it better. But at about 32, 33 weeks, I went to my regular OB appointment and she walked in the door and I was hysterical. And she was like, oh my gosh, what is happening? And at that point, she was like, we're done here. You're just going to be at home. You cannot work, which was really devastating for me because I couldn't even nest. I had to just like lay on the couch because I was in just so much pain. Nothing touched the pain. It was an experience.
For others going through that, how did you get through each day? Any recommendations you have for others who might be listening?
Yeah. So I had visitors come and do the work for me. Cause right at that time, you've had your shower, you're super excited about washing all the clothes and building all of the things and getting the nursery ready. You're so excited, but I couldn't do any of it. And especially if you are on bed rest in the hospital, some of our mono moms really have to experience that in the hospital, which can be really difficult. And I would say FaceTime, I would say visitors, I read the, Oh crap, you're having twins book, which was really exciting to kind of get myself in the mood of like, okay, what can I expect moving forward as a parent and things like that. If there's any good shows that you can binge that have lots of seasons.
Also. Yes. Yeah. Well, and how long did you carry the twins then? When were they born?
They were born at 35 weeks. I was allowed, I like begged to go back to work for like a half a day, twice a week, which my OB finally agreed to, despite the pain. And I had gone to work that morning and I had an OB appointment in the afternoon. And I just said to her, I said, I think I'm leaking fluid. And she was like, and you went to work with this? And I was like, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is like a new phenomenon for me. I don't know. Maybe I needed to go to the bathroom. I don't know. So I went and she was like, no, sure enough, you are. And so that was at 35 weeks. And then I went straight into the hospital without even a thought to think that my children would go into the NICU, which is also very interesting to me because I got there and one of my colleagues who's a neonatologist was like, okay, the twins are going to go here in the NICU. And I was like, what, why would they go to the NICU? You know?
Yeah. Well, what did the first few days look like for you?
So I would say that that first night when I got to sleep without two other people with me, that I mean, like physically inside of my body was probably one of the best sleeps I've ever had in my life. Just being able to rest, I would say. I was fortunate. I did not have to have a cesarean section, so I was not dealing with kind of the pain of the incision. And I was very fortunate on that spectrum. But my twins were born 5.5 hours apart, which was really wild. My son was born in the OR. They tried really hard to get my daughter to do what she was supposed to, and she was not having that. So they actually let me leave the OR, and I went back to L&D, and I had her in an L&D room 5.5 hours later. And my son Joey went to the NICU probably, in the first half hour after he was born. And then we just kind of waited. He was over there, and then Maddie was born. And I just remember she came out, and I could tell that she had some breathing difficulty. And so they did some skin to skin with her. And I was like, can you just take her? Like, she doesn't seem like she's breathing too well. And they were like, all right, well, we wanted you to see her. It's hard being on, like having that knowledge as well, because I couldn't just enjoy the birth of my new baby. I was like, okay, take her away and get her okay.
Well, that is something that I wanted to ask you because it has to be such a unique perspective. I remember our dear friend who was in the NICU with us. We met during our joint NICU journeys, and she was a PICU nurse at a Philadelphia area hospital. And she knew every single thing that was going on with her daughters. And how did that feel for you, knowing so much and yet being on the parent side?
I'd say it was really kind of hard. So my husband is not medical, which was an interesting experience. Like our first experience with our first OB, she just kind of spoke to me and medically, and he had like so many questions, and I don't know anything about OB, and so we ended up changing our OB because we moved where we were going to deliver, just so that I was anticipating what if I had extreme preemies, like 24 weekers, and I'd want to go back to work. I could see them at work. And so being able to like talk to parents and meet them where they're at with the language is so important because you have so many questions. And so, initially they had to like put the smackdown on me. Those NICU nurses do not play with those babies. They were like, you cannot just do whatever you want. You're not a physician. You're a mom. You got to follow the rules. I was like, oh, okay. I'm sorry. So that was really interesting, but there were just still so many things about neonatology that I didn't know. And so it was really scary. And then also trying to like direct care from what I thought was best versus like the neonatologist had to say like, this is what we got to do here. We got to move forward with this, and that's hard, balancing that act between like a doctor mom and just mom,
Mm-hmm. And, we say all the time, because I wanted to kind of ask you what the biggest lesson you learned was, but I want to just bring up, you spent 6 days in the NICU. The twins came home same day?
They both came home the same day. I was very fortunate in that regard.
It's amazing. We often, when I'm speaking with families, sometimes they say, well, we only were in the NICU 5 days. We were only in the NICU, 10 days. And at Today is a Good Day, we say there's no only. We don't like the word only because it doesn't matter how long you're in the NICU. It's not where you expect to be, just like you were talking about when they said, oh, this is where your babies are going to be in the NICU. And you're like, what do you mean they're going to the NICU? So I think looking at the time that you spent, the 6 days that you spent, what's the biggest lesson you learned looking back on that experience?
I think communication is so important between parents and their care team. And, I know that we don't always see the physicians, they are rounding, they are all over the place going to births that, but the people that are there all the time are your nurses. And I know the relationships that parents build with the nurses and the physicians and all of the other folks that are there are just so important. But I was also sick, which was really hard because again, my husband's not medical. He thought everybody was going to die. The idea that we were leaving the hospital without the twins for him was really, really traumatic. Once they went to the NICU, I was like, okay, we're just going to have to ride this out. But for him, that was 35 weeks, that's like almost term. Like they're not going to come home with us today. Like, no, they're not. But at one point, I had postpartum preeclampsia. I had a fever. I was not allowed in the NICU. My twins were born in December, and that happened to be over Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, which was even more terrible. And so just being able to call and talk to somebody and get the updates, and with the newest technology available, the girls texted me photos because they knew my personal number. But with the current technology, there's so much interaction with parents throughout the day. Hey, your baby took this much for milk, or all that stuff, and here's a picture of me today. And that's really so important. And the one thing that I always stress to parents as a general pediatrician is this is family-centered care. If you have questions or concerns or thoughts, you need to bring them to me. And if you find a provider who's not willing to talk to you or answer those questions, then it might be time to talk to somebody else, because this is your child and we're a team taking care of them. And so that communication to know what was going on, what were they doing, even if it was just they just ate and they pooped, and that's amazing. They're growing.
Well, and I feel like that communication piece is so important. So you're a pediatrician, you work with families post NICU that they come to speak with you. And when you think about that next step, what type of care team, okay, put your pediatrician hat on, Dr. Walsh. What kind of care team should parents be thinking about when they are out of the NICU to put in place?
So, once you leave the NICU, you kind of get released to your general pediatrician, right? And it really depends on what's going on with your baby as to how much more involvement is going to be necessary, right? So maybe while you were inpatient, the nutritionist was involved, maybe the physical therapist, the occupational therapist, depending on any other issues that your baby may have had. If you had respiratory issues, you're going to have lots of specialists, right? Your pulmonologist, maybe your cardiologist, maybe your neurologist, but your general pediatrician is going to be your central hub where they are going to help you get back to everybody that you need to do follow-up with, right? So they are going to be your primary source of information. How do I get back to these folks? And in your office, if you have this available in your primary care office, maybe your social worker, maybe, depending again, how early your baby was born, if you haven't gotten their insurance squared away yet. And then the other thing is behavioral health, because postpartum depression is a real thing for mamas. And daddies also, we know that dads are also affected by postpartum depression. And so, talking to somebody, if that is something that you feel that you need, is super duper important. And so the care team is pretty wide. And that may be, your baby who spent 2 days or your baby who spent 2 months in the NICU.
Well, I think you bring up a good point too, with the care team being so wide, not only for the baby, but also for the parent self-care of making sure that your mental health, your needs are taken care of. We talk about that a lot with our NICU Family Advocate program, which is really working to bridge that gap from NICU to home for families to make sure that they have the items that they need, that they're taken care of. Do you need groceries? Do you need a pack and play? Do you need a car seat? What do you need? But I think too, I love that you brought up about the pediatrician. Our surviving twin, she'll be 15 this year, hard to believe. Her pediatrician, we call him the boss man. We love him so much. We've called him the boss man since Claire came out of the NICU. I met him, I think, when I was in the hospital before Claire was discharged. We were recommended to go to this practice, and he has been such an instrumental part of Claire's growth and such a important part of our lives in asking feedback and what do you think about this? Even, and what I think is important is even during COVID, when we saw some challenges with school, he was the first person I called to say, hey, we're seeing these. What are your recommendations for this? And we were able to go get her an evaluation for an IEP, and that relationship that you build. So as families are leaving the NICU, and we've talked about this in past podcast episodes, make sure you take the time to find the right pediatrician for your family who you are going to be able to build a really strong relationship with.
Yeah, it is so important. And, there's so many things that we do as pediatricians, and, parents bring all the things to us, everything from growth and development to potty training, to discipline, to school, to mental health. We are experts in children's health, and we're here to advocate for your child and help you, get through these things. And so when you're picking a pediatrician, some parents may think, okay, my child was born here. I have a lot of specialists at this, say a tertiary care or children's hospital. So I want a pediatrician in that network. Some parents will look for that. Some parents want a pediatrician that's in their backyard. I have to go a lot. I need to be able to get there easily. Maybe my other kids go there. I know the doctors there. I like the doctors there. It really depends on the family and what they're looking for. Some pediatricians will, if this is your first baby, they will offer, like a welcome, like meet the pediatrician. If you want to meet them, maybe there are certain things that you have thought about when you are raising your child. And I really want, I want this for my child. And will my pediatrician agree with that? And so you can go and you can talk to them and say, hey, does this fall in line with something that, you could get on board with to help me manage as a parent? And it's really important. And, if you pick your pediatrician before you leave the hospital, which you should, we're going to get all of your data. So oftentimes when I'm seeing all my newborns, I already have all of the information about your baby. I know, how many weeks they were, what if they passed their hearing test, what their birth weight was. And especially that's super important in my NICU grads, because oftentimes their history is a lot longer than a baby who was not in the NICU. And so that's really important as well, because you want to feel like your doctor knows your baby and cares about your family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important. Looking at the pediatrician, so families that are coming out of the NICU and need to go to a NICU follow-up clinic, which some hospitals have, some hospitals don't. So you need to do some research. We found a lot of value taking Claire. She went until she was about 6, I think, to a NICU follow-up clinic. What's interesting, though, is, and this is so important, early intervention, NICU follow-up clinic, and pediatricians can all tell you a little something different around development. And it's kind of figuring out what makes the most sense and working with your pediatrician to just kind of talk through all of the different feedback that you can get on your baby. But how important is that NICU follow-up in partnership with the pediatrician?
Oh, I would say it's invaluable. So first of all, I think it's really exciting as a parent to go back to NICU follow-up, especially as your baby grows and develops, and really seeing that growth and development over the time is just so special for you and your care team that knew your baby. Those first moments of life is really exciting, I think. Those folks in the NICU development clinic are experts in those babies, right? So in our vulnerable babies, in our preterm babies, in our full-term babies that had issues after birth who need to go to follow-up clinic, they're experts. And so, I always think about, I had an ex 26 weeker who was coming to me. I was following her, and she was she came home, she was doing great. And then as she got older, she started to like fall off of her developmental curve, which was a little bit worrisome to me. But then I got her NICU follow-up clinic note that was like, she is just right on target, right on track, which gave me a little bit more, like it made me feel better that, okay, I don't have to be alarmed about what's happening. Like this is normal for her gestational age. And so it is really important to have that care team in place. And so sometimes, I'll say, okay, so we're, our development is slowing down a little bit. When are we following up next with early intervention, or when are we following up next with NICU follow-up clinic? And, let's get some feedback from them, because remember, NICU follow-up clinic has your provider. It has, oftentimes we'll have the PT and the OT there, and they're working with your baby to see, okay, what milestones are we meeting? Where are we at in our corrected age? Are we doing what we're supposed to? And then, they can make further recommendations as well. So it's really, really important, I think.
This is such a great conversation. I love it. From the pediatrician perspective, so we talked about NICU follow-up. What are some of the first few questions that you recommend families asking their pediatrician when they go, post NICU, they're going in? And then also, I think it's really hard with the feeding piece and starting food, especially for preemies. It was, Claire had a lot of sensory things. It was so hard to teach her how to drink out of a straw and to eat things. It was a whole adventure. What do you ask?
So, your baby comes home. And, again, it's all going to depend on when we came home. But, one thing that we know is that our preemie friends oftentimes have a lot more spit up than some of our non-preemie friends. And so that is a really big concern for parents. And so anything, when the parent tells me something happened, they are the eyes and the ears of that baby. And so I know whatever it is that's happening, I have to really take that into account when I'm looking at the baby, right? And so if you're ever feeling dismissed by your pediatrician, again, just keep bringing it up, because you are the advocate for your baby. But so spit up is a huge question for a lot of parents that come out of the NICU. If you haven't already dealt with it while you were in the NICU, that's one thing. And so the feeding piece is a huge piece. The other thing, sleep. We were monitored 24 hours a day while we were in the NICU. And so that's really scary coming home. No matter how long that you spent in the NICU, when you're a parent and you bring that baby home for the first time, that's really scary. Okay. And that's why we recommend, baby is always back to sleep in their own crib, in your room, if that's possible, right? Because that's the best place for them. That's the safest place, at least for the first 6 months of life or longer, especially for a preemie, just because we want to get to that corrected age. So just talking about the sleep arrangements, sometimes in the NICU, you're going to see babies in different positions because of the stuff that they have in that isolette. And so talking to the pediatrician about that, if you're like, well, can I do that? Do I need to use a wedge or a froggy? If your baby had a froggy on, like that weighted thing that they used. Feeding is really hard. So even with my guys, our pediatrician, at 4 months of age, in a full-term kid who's meeting milestones, I will say to parents, hey, it looks like your baby is meeting all of these milestones. It looks like we're going to be able to start our supplementary food journey. In our preemie babies, oftentimes we're waiting until 6 months corrected age because they have other things that they're dealing with, right? So one of the things is the gag reflex. You put the food in, everything just comes back out because they can't handle the spoon. They can't handle that new texture, that new flavor. And so really talking to your pediatrician about when it's appropriate to start that. And especially if we want to do like baby-led weaning, that's going to be a whole nother ball game for our preemie friends, because again, this involves different motor skills and, you want to make sure that your baby is where they need to be to start those things so that it's not unsafe. The other question that a lot of parents have is like, can people see the baby? Can they come and visit? I love masks. I know that not everybody is a huge fan, but I encourage parents, especially during cold and flu season, to, make sure everybody has their flu and whooping cough shot, maybe a COVID shot if it's necessary, washing hands the second that we come in. If anybody even sneezes or sounds like they might be sick, like you cannot come and see the baby. And that's for all babies, preemie or not, vulnerable or not, it's so important if your baby gets a fever in those first few months of life, it's just a nightmare, going to the hospital. So that's one really important thing. Or can I take the baby out? Yeah, you can take your baby out. You can absolutely do that. That baby car seat is going to protect your baby from people. And I always tell parents, I'm like, you have a cover, get a cover. Don't let people touch your baby. Don't let people kiss your baby, any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're a parent and now you have a baby and you can do all the things that you did before. It's going to be harder. They require a lot more time to get them out of the house, but you can do it.
Yes. And I always loved we had a bassinet stroller when Claire was little.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it changed to a seated stroller later when she got bigger, but that bassinet stroller, because she came home on an apnea monitor, so we could tuck her up in it and nobody could get to her. And then her apnea monitor fit right at the bottom of it. And I loved that bassinet stroller. It was such a key piece because people would try to look in, but she was tucked up in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I may be smiling a little bit, but I'm thinking about, the sleeping, and Claire came home on an apnea monitor. So we were in her room at 3:00 in the morning. At midnight, that apnea monitor went off a lot with false alarms, but it is quite an adjustment. I always say they had to kick us out of the NICU when we left. We're like, are you sure? No, don't you want to keep us a little longer? But we, to this day, I may have left the house this morning, and you always check on the breathing. I have an almost 15-year-old. I'm like, is she breathing? Okay, great. I'm out the door. I probably shouldn't say that out loud, but it just never leaves you. It never leaves you. So we did talk a lot about finding a right pediatrician. Any other advice you have for anyone just as they're trying to do that research?
So there's lots of pediatricians and it depends on where you live. I'm in, southeastern Pennsylvania. So we have a very wide, rich network of pediatricians here, pediatricians who are in private groups, pediatricians who are associated with children's hospitals, lots of different pediatricians. And so talk to people. One other thing that I learned as a parent, especially during my maternity leave, is social media is good for that, right? So, getting on a group for, during my pregnancy, I was on a group for moms who were due January of 2019, right? So we all got to kind of experience the milestones of like, oh, your baby is the size of a lemon or whatever it was, right? Moms of multiples groups, your local moms of multiples group, just talking to people about their experiences with their pediatrician. Who do they see? Why do they like them? And things along those lines. So, that's a great place. Social media, you got to take with a grain of salt sometimes, right? But if these are people that or that you trust, like your mom's group, that these people, then it might be a good place as well to start.
Wonderful. Great advice. And most importantly, how are your sweet miracles doing today?
They're so good. They just finished kindergarten, which is such an exciting journey. Being a mom of multiples is definitely hard. There are like fun challenges that come with it. The twins were in different classes, which they have been separated for some time now through preschool and now kindergarten, which is very interesting to see them. But it's hard, like 2 different classes, but the same grade, and they do things differently. And this one celebrates this and that one doesn't. And why don't I get to do that? And read across America and trying to explain to the teacher, like, well, I'm going to be in that one's classroom. So can I stop by to see the other one? Because the first thing they're going to say is, Mom was reading in my classroom.
Yes.
But it's just so exciting to see them grow and develop. And it's really funny. People always tell us my son is my twin and my daughter is my husband's twin. So we each got one.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for that update. Thanks for all of this incredible feedback, really great advice. And thanks for sharing your story with us. We appreciate you being here, Dr. Walsh.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a fun time chatting.
Yes. Thank you for tuning in to the NICU Today podcast, brought to you by Today is a Good Day. Learn more at todayisagooddday.org.